to another episode of Simply Medicare. I'm your host, Debbie Stroup, your Michigan Medicare specialist, and I'm really excited today to bring on our new guest, Craig Fowler, and he's going to talk to us about an issue that might be really important to a lot of us. So, Craig, go ahead.
Hi, well, thank you so much for having me, Debbie. I'm Craig Fowler. I'm the founder of Joy Gauge, an organization focused on helping people with early stage cognitive impairment and dementia. And I'm also on the executive board of the Dementia Action Alliance, an organization that's focused on improving the daily lives of people living with dementia and their families. My story is my mom, I guess it's been now a little over 20 years ago, started having some issues at work. And she kind of ignored them for a while. She was in her early 60s and then suddenly announced she was retiring early, which surprised us all. And within a year or so after, it became really apparent to my father and I and the rest of the family that she was really struggling with some cognitive issues. She then had a few, I think they were TIAs, small strokes, and we had her diagnosed at the time, nearly 20 years ago, with early onset Alzheimer's disease. We got, I would say, we were told that she would be alive for maybe 5 years. And she stopped going to church, stopped going out a lot, and just really became reclusive. And looking back, I realize now we did exactly the opposite of what we should have been doing. We should have instead worked with my mom on getting her out more, having more activities with church and with other people, and making sure she was getting great sleep and exercise and really living her life to the fullest. And my mom ended up living for about 10 more years. And after that, science has came a long way. We know a lot more about dementia, about Alzheimer's disease. And part of the mission of Joy Gauge was me looking back and saying, wow, there's so many things we would have done differently. How can I help millions of people who are going through the same thing now 20 years later make better decisions and really have a higher quality of life and even a longer life for their loved ones who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia? And for the individuals themselves, how can we get them to know that there's hope, that it's not all negative, and that they can have actually a pretty good quality of life if they make some specific lifestyle changes.
So, looking back on your mom, and you said she became reclusive. Why do you think that happened? Was she aware of what happened? Was she embarrassed? What led her down that path? And then we'll talk about what are some things that maybe you wish you could have done differently.
Yeah, well, there were two big reasons. The first was, I think, great stigma. And my mom was in a small town in Tennessee. I think, and it's not just regional, but I think especially in small towns, people have a fear of cognitive issues, and they tend to look at someone and think the person is less than because they're not able to have the same conversation that you and I are having right now. And that stigma, I think, hit my mom really hard. She was worried about how people would treat her. She was worried about, and again, church. She went to church for all my life and then stopped going. And I think she was just embarrassed. And again, there was a stigma surrounding having a mental issue that made her just very uncomfortable. That was number one. Number two, she'd had one hip replaced, and she needed to have the second hip replaced. And when we were told that she would have maybe 5 years left, the family, including her, decided, well, it probably doesn't make sense to go ahead and get the hip replaced. So she wasn't very mobile, so she wasn't able to get out and move. Now, of course, I know that it would have been much better when she was just having early cognitive issues to have that hip replaced so that she could exercise, walk, and be far more mobile. So there was both a stigma side and a physical mobility side that kept her from being as active as she really should have been.
And so what were some of the really early signs that you noticed? I mean, often we kid about we've lost our keys and we can't remember somebody's name. Not really a kidding manner, but we're trying to make light of it. So how did you determine, okay, this is different than I can't find my keys, or I can't find my wallet, or where did I park in the Kroger parking lot? You know, how is that different? How did you make that determination?
Well, I think the first was she had worked in the same company in credit and collections for the same furniture company for over 40 years. And she started becoming extremely stressed with work. She started having real difficulty remembering things. She had difficulty performing. And looking back, we at first thought, well, maybe, 20 years ago, maybe it was that she's not great with computers and things were becoming more computerized. But in reality, we were in denial. My father and I were both in denial. It was clear that if you've been in the same same department for over 40 years, Debbie, you should not be getting really stressed about normal work. So that was the first big thing that we saw. We also saw problems with driving, where she started being, it was becoming difficult. She was having some issues with the car, and she became very, I would say, insecure with her abilities to drive. And for someone that's in their this time early to mid 60s, that's not something that really you should expect at that point. So looking back, we saw a number of factors that showed an inability, Debbie, to do tasks that she could have done easily 2 years before, but also ones that for her age should not have been a problem.
And so when you're looking back at that, you said you were in denial.
Mm-hmm.
What were some things that those of us that might be experiencing that, perhaps our spouse, our mother, our father, our brother, our sister, our neighbor, what can we look for, and what can be the early steps that we can take?
Well, the first thing is to be, I think of it as, if you notice something, you should dig deeper. So there are the great thing with online questions now is there are some great resources online that you can go to, including AARP has some great things on this, just to look and see what's the difference between normal normal aging and mental changes in normal aging versus something that could be more serious. And we could talk for the next hour on those, but instead I would just encourage people to go to some good resources like AARP and look and see those. And it will become, if you see that something is like, I think of it as, if you forget where you put your keys, that's one thing. If you forget where you're going or why you're going, that's a little different. So there's little subtle things like that you can look out for. So I would say that would be the first thing. The second is, be aware that there are new technologies. There's a great company, if someone wants to look up this company, called Brain Check, that provides a service to doctors and to medical assistants that gives a very good assessment using an iPad that will allow someone in a medical setting to get a really quick, pretty accurate diagnosis that you couldn't have gotten a couple of years ago. So I would say, first of all, be willing to go and get a diagnosis. Know that there's technology that allows you to understand if it's really a problem or not. And then the biggest thing, Debbie, is to then be confident that if the test shows that there is something wrong, there's a lot that we can do, that we know that we can do today, that can change your trajectory.
Okay. What are some of those things?
Well, the first thing, there are a number of specific factors that have been proven by science and numerous studies to improve the trajectory of someone who has cognitive impairment. One of the first ones that we don't always think about is sleep. A large number of people of all ages, but particularly seniors, have problems sleeping. And science and studies have shown over the last 10 years that REM sleep, the deep sleep that you get, rapid eye movement sleep, and deep sleep, the sleep where your body is almost completely in a shutdown phase, those two are really important to memory consolidation, to brain health and brain function. So one of the first things that we at Joy Gauge, we will ask people about, and is how are they sleeping? What are they doing about their sleep? And have they been wearing a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something that's got sleep tracking capability to help them understand and track if there's a problem? And that's one of the simplest things that individuals can do. You know, because I'm at a high risk, I've spent the last couple of years really working on my sleep. And I'll tell you, Debbie, it's amazing how much you can do to improve your REM and deep sleep if you are tracking it every night and working on specific changes to your life that will make you sleep better.
And how can we do that at home?
Well, there are lots of things you can do. One of the first and simplest is to turn the screen off at least 30 minutes to an hour before you go to bed. That's a great one. The other is another one is to be more regimented with the time. I think many of us think, oh, it's weekend, we can stay up till 2 a.m. But if you really want to get great sleep, if you can go to bed roughly at the same time and get up roughly at the same time every day, it does wonders for sleep. Another is late night alcohol. Some of us are a generation where that scotch before bed is a normal part of life. But I've realized from tracking that actually raises your heart rate through the night and creates worse sleep and really disturbs REM sleep. So there are a number of other factors, but those are just some really simple hints that I would recommend. Many people don't realize that the device they have on their wrist has great sleep tracking, but most smartwatches, whether it's a Samsung or an Apple or a Fitbit, have really pretty good sleep tracking, and many people just aren't even using that.
I've heard of, like, keep your room cool and your room dark. I mean, can that help as well?
Absolutely. Cool is better, dark is better, and keeping blinds pulled and even having sleep goggles are great. The little easy, you can buy them at CVS. Those are great, especially if your significant other loves to get up early in the morning or you're not on the same schedule. That can be a real lifesaver. White noise is great. Every night I have white noise. Pink noise is even a little better for a lot of people. So every night I leave pink noise going so that when the cat jumps on the bed, it doesn't wake me up.
Yeah. I've also heard that, if you heard anything about blue blocker or something like that, glasses that you can wear before bed?
Absolutely. I have a pair, and I also have on my phone and computer blue light blocking settings changed. So most phones and laptops now and iPads have a setting that will turn the shade of light from more of a blue shade to a yellow shade starting at about 10 o'clock or so at night. And you can usually configure that. So the blue blocking glasses are great, and the changes in changing your computer as well. And of course, if you can just turn the computer and the phone off an hour before bed, that's even better.
Easier said than done.
Yes.
And those of us that didn't grow up with a phone or that technology might be a little bit easier, but the younger generation, that is a harder thing. And I was going to ask you a question. So I've got a couple questions, but dementia, we talk about. First of all, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? And I think people use those words interchangeably, but they're not the same from what I understand. So first of all, what is the difference? And second, is it important that we know the difference when we are seeing cognitive decline in mom or dad?
That is a wonderful question. And it is important to know the difference. So Alzheimer's is one form of dementia. So dementia is more of a blanket term for different types of cognitive decline. And we could talk for hours on different types of dementia, but for example, my mother likely had something called vascular dementia, but back 20 years ago, people tend to lump a lot more into Alzheimer's disease. But there is also FTD or frontotemporal dementia. There are a number of different ones that are out there, and they will have different symptoms, different types of, so that's one of the reasons why I'm being part of the Dementia Action Alliance, we really want to use the term dementia and include many people who don't have Alzheimer's, because people use those terms interchangeably. Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. It's one of the more prevalent forms, and it's the one that we mostly think about when someone gets older. It usually hits people when they're older and involves the loss of memory, especially the loss of short-term memory.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sure. Is it just older people that can get dementia?
It is not. People get different forms of dementia. Even people in their 30s can often have different types of dementia, like FTD. Some forms of dementia can hit at earlier ages. In general, Debbie, when the brain ages, you are more likely to have, with every year you get older, you're more likely to get a form of dementia with the brain being older and having potentially so I think of it as people, if you're in your 90s, you have actually a reasonable chance that you have some form of dementia. It might be mild, but it's still dementia. And the other interesting thing, now there's a term that I used earlier. Cognitive impairment is something that we hear a lot as well. And cognitive impairment really is viewed as early phases of cognitive challenges that might turn into dementia. So it's kind of confusing, and honestly, I think there's a really fuzzy line that not all neurologists or doctors will agree with to say if someone's got dementia or someone has cognitive impairment. My observation in the last 5 to 10 years is people like to use the cognitive impairment term a lot more. And I think it's the right thing to do because many people, when they have early phases, can make these changes to their lifestyle to slow progression. And often when people hear dementia or Alzheimer's, they have an erroneous belief that the end is near and things are going to go downhill really fast. And that's just not the case for everyone.
No, and their cognitive decline may go down, but their physical ability doesn't. And that is really difficult, I think, for a lot of families where mom mentally is struggling, but physically she's fine. I hear that a lot. Like, yeah, mom doesn't understand, but she's as strong as a horse and she's going to outlive us all probably.
And that was the case with my mom. She was incredibly healthy. When she did pass away, it was actually the hip that was not replaced, that she ended up falling, and the hip ended up being the end. And but my mom, outside of that hip, was still very, very, very fit and very strong, and that's very normal to see. So you're exactly right, Debbie. And then one of the things that when I mentioned earlier, getting a diagnosis, one of the great things about that is there are CMS codes that are specific to cognitive impairment, including a wonderful every 6-month care planning benefit that is unfortunately not used by family practitioners and doctors, even gerontologists, very often. But once you have a diagnosis, it opens up that benefit, which can provide you with really good guidance, and it's something that can be used every 6 months. And so one of the reasons why a diagnosis is important is it allows you to get the care covered that you really need to be on the right trajectory.
And how do people go about that?
One of the things is they can ask their doctor. So one of the missions at Joy Gauge we have is to educate people, but also to educate doctors and to, I mentioned the organization Brain Check. Their app will actually help a doctor who may have not done this before, or a medical assistant, create a care plan for someone. So one of the things is to get more education, both from individuals and from the care community, that there are benefits out here that really cover something besides a pill or a piece of medication. It covers actually something that I personally believe is more important than the medication.
Yeah. So, all right. So folks are listening to this and they're like, I think my mom might be challenging, there might be some things, my dad, perhaps myself. what can we do? What are some easy things that maybe we could do at home? But then what are those harder things? Like, okay, I know I need to take this next step. And I want to bury my head in the sand. I don't want to face it. It's going to get better. I'm really busy. I can't take care of mom. I'm faced with all of these really difficult things. And I'm standing in a room and there's a million things going on. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do?
So one resource, it's a absolutely free resource that I would recommend to anyone who has just either been diagnosed or is thinking they're going to be they could be diagnosed or just is really worried, is to go to the Dementia Action Alliance webpage. It's daanow.org. That's daanow.org. And there's a manual called Pathways to Wellbeing, and it's you can download the PDF for free. And the organization, if you want a printed copy, does print on demand just at cost. So so if you want that, you can order it, but it provides, it's a few hundred pages, and it's the best resource I've ever seen on helping individuals navigate both lifestyle changes and choices and decisions they need to make. And the thing that's, I think, the best about this manual is it's very positive and really helps you move down a path of living well with dementia. That's really what you would, so I would say, first go to that. There are also other resources. The one thing that I would recommend everyone to do is to get past the stigma, be honest, and try to have an honest discussion. This is really hard, Debbie, to do. And I didn't do this over 20 years ago. I was scared. My dad was scared. My mom was scared. And part of the mission of Joy Gauge and our organization is to try to help in a small way, change the mindset in Michigan and around the country from being diagnosed with cognitive impairment is a death sentence and you're going to die a horrible death, and instead switch it to millions and millions of people have cognitive impairment. There are emerging drugs that are now approved. There are lots of well-proven lifestyle changes. We know so much right now compared to 15 years ago. If you get diagnosed early enough, you can adjust the trajectory and, very potentially live a long, very positive life where you have wonderful experiences with family and grandkids. And instead of avoiding a diagnosis, get it as soon as possible so that you can maximize your life and your chance for staying on a good course.
And we know that's difficult. That is difficult. We want to bury our head in the sand. We've got a million things going on, and we just put it off. A little while ago, we talked to somebody who was in hospice, and similar thing. We are going to pass away. And so let's talk about it now to make it the best we can. But just like dementia, I know it's easier said than done. And what can we say to those people that's just like, take that first step? We know it's scary, but in the end, it could be better. What can we say to them?
Well, something that I like to say is, all right, is to give them kind of an option. You can be diagnosed, which is going to be positive, and again, helps you get some Medicare benefits, other things. But if you decide not to be diagnosed, most of the lifestyle changes, which make up the majority of the positive things you can do, you can start doing those today. So even if you want to go down an easy step, Debbie, you can say, oh, well, I'm concerned I might have cognitive impairment. Why don't I get about this information and start making these changes like sleep, like getting more mental activity and connection through others. There are a number of things that we know will, and definitely more exercise. So there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, if you're scared that you have something, that you're scared that you have cognitive impairment, but you don't want to be diagnosed, why not go ahead and take all the steps anyway? They're only going to be positive for you.
Right. Get better sleep, do some exercise, maybe change your diet a little bit. Are there any programs that you know of where people can sign up to kind of give their mind some mental exercise as well?
Absolutely. So the science, of course, is changing all the time, and we're learning more. But two things for mental exercise that have been shown to be really effective. First, if what you're doing is an activity that involves others, so joining clubs, there are a number of I mentioned the Dementia Action Alliance. They have lots of online programs where you meet and talk with people via Zoom every day. So if you're not currently part of a networking group or part of activities and clubs, being more involved, that appears to be the most protective, is when you're doing something mentally stimulating that causes you to interact with others. But Debbie, if you think about it, when you're with a group of people, you are really active. You have to think about what people are saying. So that's a really strong, it's involving your brain on all levels. The second is studies have been showing that when you learn an activity that is hard, it's something that really makes your brain work on many sides. So, for example, learning a language, learning how to play an instrument, those are areas that appear to be the most protective because your brain is really being challenged and really moving forward. There's a bunch of phone games that will say, we're going to challenge you. If you've ever seen the ads on the phone, this is a great game for strengthening your mind. I don't think that staring at a phone doing the same game over and over for hours on end is really mentally challenging. And I don't think there's been a lot of science behind that, but we know that learning to play the piano can be.
Mm-hmm. So I have to share just a personal story here. Last year, my husband and I winter in Arizona. And so we live in a 55 and older community. And I decided that I wanted to learn something brand new. I mean, totally brand new. So I learned how to make bowls out of wooden, like, pieces of board. And in my mind, I was like, how do you make a board like this into a bowl? Made no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, people were like, oh, you do this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. I want to learn how to do this. And I did. And my bowls weren't pretty and they weren't perfect and they were lopsided, but I learned something new. I learned how to glue them and push the parts together and then use a whatever it's called to grind it down. And I can't wait to go back and do it again. And I figured out how to make a bowl, because how do you make a bowl? That doesn't make any sense, but it does. And so it was frustrating, but I forced myself to do that.
Well, Debbie, that's a great story. And I think it shows the type of activity that's really great for the brain. You're learning something very new. You're probably a little nervous about it. You don't understand how it's going to work. And you're activating your brain on a lot of different levels when you do that. That's a great story. One thing that I mentioned the phone games earlier. One thing that I think scientists and researchers are a little unclear about now, with the current growth of TikTok and the internet, people scrolling Facebook for hours on end. We're not sure, is that going to be good or bad for the brain? My current thinking is, from what I've seen, the evidence is, if you are truly being social, if you're really using Facebook in the original intended way to post to your family and to see what your family is doing and you're doing, then I actually think that can be positive. But I worry a lot that people who are experiencing cognitive decline can isolate themselves, and instead of watching TV, they're just mindlessly scrolling. And so my current belief is that that type of use of technology isn't really helping the brain. But if you're using it in a social way, I think it actually can be. Or in an educational way. There are a lot of online classes to teach you how to do things now. And I think that's something that I think could actually be a real positive, especially for people who don't get a chance to winter in Arizona and who are stuck in the snowy Michigan winters.
Yeah, right. But, there are things that you can teach yourself. And I just was like, I want to learn how to do this. And, you're right. Not everybody has that ability to go outside of their home and do something, but even something like I'm going to teach myself how to crochet or whatever. So I think it's a possibility. If people want to get more information about Joy Gauge, how can they do that?
So please go onto their website. It's joygauge.com. And there's a series of different things, including kind of a neat test you can take that will someone will personally look at the results and try to look at 6 different factors that we consider as far as lifestyle factors that are positive to brain health. And there's more information there. And again, I mentioned the Dementia Action Alliance, daanow.org is another. And either of those two will provide, I think, a lot of resources to people. And I would just say, especially if you have any concerns about and you want to learn more, I mean, talking to your doctor is always a positive thing. I would just encourage everyone, especially if you have a family doctor or someone or family practitioner, someone that you're close to already. I would encourage everyone, when you start seeing something that's worrying, bring it up to your doctor early, not late.
Right. And it's so easy to put it off and put your head in the sand. I mean, if you are listening to this, if you have any concern at all, I urge you to do what Craig is saying. I mean, call, look up that number, just take that first step. Sometimes the first step can be the hardest one. And you know what? If you go through it and they do this scenario for you and it's not for you, okay. But I would just encourage you, don't put your head in the sand. Do something.
And Debbie, you're so right. And thank you for that. And one last thing I want to add on to this. I know there is Leqembi has been approved. That's something that was fully approved a few months ago, I think in May by the FDA. It's the first, I think, one that CMS has approved. And I think they will pay, I believe there's a 20% copay, which is about $5,000 a year. So it's not cheap, but it's something that's injected twice a month. And that's the first treatment, really fully approved, Medicare approved treatment for dementia or early stage dementia. It only has a certain effect, so I think it's one piece of a bigger puzzle, but it's for people at early stages. So one of the things to think about is, well, if you decide to ignore things and you push things off too long, and eventually you are past the stage where you are eligible for something like Leqembi, or you're past the stage where some of the lifestyle changes like sleep and others could have been preventative. You're really putting yourself more at peril. So I would say the earlier you talk to your doctor, the earlier you address something, the more likely that you are going to actually get benefit from medication and from changes, right?
Yeah, so just don't put it off. If you're hearing this and you have any question, please take action. You can always change your mind later. You know, you could talk to your doctor and they're like, yeah, I think that this is what's going on, or you could go to that website, but take that first step and don't rule out everything before you've even taken the first step.
Absolutely. And I would also throw one extra thing from a different way, and that's to all of the individuals out there who know people who have cognitive impairment, early stage, dementia, Alzheimer's. I would just encourage everyone, do a little reading on how to support and be positive to people. One of the reasons why we have so much stigma is we have a lot of uneducated people in society that don't, who look at individuals with bias that have cognitive impairment. And so part of getting rid of the stigma is getting everyone in the world who doesn't have cognitive impairment or dementia to change our way of thinking and realize that individuals with cognitive impairment, they're just like you and I. They're no different than someone who's a different sex, a different color, a different race, it's just a difference. And it's not something that makes an individual less than. It's not something that makes you and want to treat someone differently. I believe people like my mom would have been, I think, far more likely to go after a diagnosis and address this if she didn't feel like she was going to have bias and stigma against her.
Craig, thank you so much for talking about this topic. It's sensitive, but it's important that we talk about it because it is part of life. It is for a lot of people.
And thank you so much, Debbie, for getting this message out. I
It's
truly appreciate this.
Truly my pleasure. And that's another episode of Simply Medicare. I'm your host, Debbie Strout. We'll see you next time.
If you've enjoyed this edition of Simply Medicare podcast and you don't want to miss any future episodes, please make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Please also leave comments and offer feedback so we can make this podcast the best it can be for you. If you need assistance with your Medicare sign-up or you just have general Medicare questions, make sure to reach out to me at 248-227-0347. You can also reach me online at MichiganMedicareSpecialist.com or through my email at Debbie@MichiganMedicareSpecialist.com. I really look forward to working with you soon.